Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Aspen Author Webinar Series. Today's topic is Perfectly Imperfect, What Students Can Learn from Real Bar Exam Answers. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items to review. The audio for this webcast is through the internet only. Please use a headset or earbuds or listen to this presentation through your laptop or mobile speakers. Secondly, this is a one-way channel. You can hear us, but we can't hear you. So if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat feature. And now I will hand it over to Stacy to present our today's presenters.
Listen, I'm very privileged and excited to introduce you to Melissa Hale, Antonia Miceli, and Tania Shah, an excellent author team who have put together an excellent book, The Ultimate Guide to the UBE. Tania is from Western State College, and Antonia is at St. Louis University School of Law. Melissa Hale is at Loyola University of Chicago School of Law. And between the three of them, it's pretty impressive. They've got about 47 years of combined experience in teaching and preparing students to succeed on the bar exam. So I hope you enjoy the presentation, and I will hand it off to my authors.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Tania Shah. I'm going to start out our presentation here. And I'm going to start out, first of all, as to sort of why we wrote this book. And so one of the things that is really important in bar prep courses that you teach, or even bar prep in general, certainly is substance, but on a fundamental level, we have to have the skill. Without the skill, we can't retain the substance. So, many students want to know what is actually possible to write within the 30 minutes on the MEE or the 90 minutes on the MPT. And the real answers that you find online or that are representative of the good answers from students, often the highest scores, or they're written by the bar examiners, are just that, sort of the highest scores and the good answers. But what they don't demonstrate is what perhaps some of the lower scoring answers are. And I think that is just as important, that sort of bottom half, because we want to teach the students what to write and also what not to write. Interestingly, I literally just gave my midterms back to my students yesterday. And one of the things I wrote, and I said, I don't care if you got the highest score or if you got the lowest score. It's what you do from now. Right? It's about improvement. It's about your skills. And that's what I want you to do, because in order for you to retain the information, we need to improve those skills. So that's really why we wrote this. We also want students to be able to have self-assessment skills. And self-assessment skills is not just about them writing, reflecting on themselves, but we also want to give them the opportunity to reflect on other answers. So we want to give students, and of course all of you, these realistic tools for assessment, realistic answers, realistic ways of looking at things. So just to talk a little bit more about sort of this self-assessment skill, that in sort of teaching, and I'm sure you see this a lot, students are really willing to be more objective looking at peer answers than their own, right? It's really hard for them to do that. And it helps build them sort of self-evaluation skills and all of that, those sort of skills. But sometimes they are a little bit hesitant to kind of say anything to their peers about what they've written. And so sometimes they might try to be a little bit softer about what it is they're saying. So here we have this objective way for students to be able to evaluate, because they're anonymous, who we've written, we've changed all the names, they don't know these people. So basically empathy is not a problem here. So they can objectively look at these answers. There's also a lot of less confidence to have to try to build the confidence less pressure to build confidence in their peers. We tell our students we want them to support each other. We don't want them to be competitive against each other. And then in that, in that supportive law school environment that we try to foster, then students will often feel like they need to build the confidence of their skills, which is a good thing. We want that to happen. But again, it doesn't always turn into realistic assessment, whether it's self-assessment or peer assessment. And so what this book allows you to do is it allows you to standardize the skills that are needed for this uniform bar exam. And so what we've done in this book, I know it's a little bit hard to see the table of contents, but it's just a snapshot here, is that in part 1 in the introduction, we have sort of the first 30 pages or so dedicated to what this book is about, the skills that we will be teaching, and sort of words of wisdom around those skills. Because what we understand is you can't just say, here's a skill, go do it, right? Skill building, like any habit, takes some time, and it takes the right mindset to get into it. And so we talk a lot about that, your growth mindset, your sort of that grit that's required to build a skill. And, I'm going to quote from James Clear, because this is not my quote, even though I would love to pretend it's mine. The goal is to pass the bar exam, right? But it's not about the goals, it's about the systems you put in place. And that's what we've built for you. We've built the systems to put in place to assist your students in passing the bar exam. Now, I just wanted to give a little primer here about the uniform bar exam. I don't want to assume that you don't know about it, but some states that are newer to the uniform, to the UBE than others, a lot of times academic support professionals are sort of like, I don't know everything that sort of goes into this. I've been teaching one way for so long. So first of all, 40 jurisdictions all teach the exact same bar exam. That means, twice a year for 2 days, every single student who's taking the bar in those 40 jurisdictions are doing the exact same questions. That's 40 jurisdictions. Do we think it will reach all the states? I mean, we've got some states that are just holding on for dear life. A lot of time, these little coastal states right here, but you've got some other ones there. South Dakota is not budging. All right. Their South Dakota law is very important to them. So we don't know. It seems the trend is to be going towards more and more states. So in terms of the sections that are on the exam, and I just wanted to give this sort of quick primer, we have the multi-state performance test, the multi-state essay exam, and the MBE. Now, we're going to be concentrating on the multi-state performance test and the MBE in today's presentation. And the MEE, mainly because we assume that you're all familiar with the MBE. It's important, but we're going to be focusing on the writing components. The MPT is what we call a closed universe exam. It is given a statute, you're given case law, and you're given what's called a client file. And oftentimes you're asked to write a memo or a brief, just like you would have to do in real life. However, the student here gets 90 minutes to sort of take all this information. They don't need to have any outside knowledge. So it is like real life. And, 90 minutes, I mean, just imagine there could be a very rushed partner who needs to present a brief in 90 minutes. It could happen in real life, that's how long a student has, but that's how long they have on this exam. And that is what we call sort of the practical component. The MEE component is the substantive part of the writing. Will be tested on, torts, evidence, any of the multiple MEE subjects. And as you know, the MBE is also substantive law component, which is the multiple choice component of the exam. Okay, so this is our breakdown. Our breakdown is 20% weight is given to the MPT, 30% weight is given to the multi-state essay exam, and 50% is given to the MBE. And again, we're going to be concentrating on the MPT and the MEE today. And given that, I'm going to actually now turn it over to my wonderful co-author, Melissa Hale, to talk to you about the MEE.
Thanks, Tania. Tania set up why we wrote the book and kind of the background, but I want to talk a little bit about how we use it in class and how I use it with students, how we all use it with students. ultimately, all three of us, I think, wanted to create something that we could use in our class, something that would make life easier for us. And we thought if we're going to do that, we might as well share it. And so that's also kind of why we're here today. So our MEE section starts with a chapter on how to tackle the MEE. So as Tania mentioned, part of the goal of this book was to show students what's possible, to help build their confidence on what's possible, and also to show them a way to kind of assess their own work using other answers. But we need to start them with kind of the basics on what is this MEE and where do you begin? So we start them with things like what subjects are tested. And we talk about kind of what's tested just on essays versus what's tested on essay and the multiple choice. We remind them that they get 30 minutes per essay. We remind them how much each essay is worth when they're doing the essays in the MPT. I actually just went through this with a lot of my students yesterday, kind of gave them a big overview of, you're going to have 6 essays, 30 minutes each, that kind of thing. So we do spend a chapter really going over the basics. We also talked to them about things like what answers to avoid. Because again, it's one thing to kind of tell them, here, go write an essay, or here's a sample answer, but we really want to kind of take a deep dive into what they should avoid. So we talk about things like avoiding restating facts or only scratching the surface, or making the graders work too hard. I was just having this conversation with my students yesterday about how graders have a lot of these essays to get through, and they're not going to sit with you and go, oh, I see that you hit that analysis here in this paragraph. You have to kind of make it easy for them to find. So we do talk about those kind of things to avoid. And then we kind of give them an overview of what they should be doing, because it's not enough to say avoid these things, but we want to lay them out a plan that says, here's exactly what you need to be doing, including kind of a breakdown. We mentioned that this is a rough breakdown of what they should be doing, but we want to give them that setup. On that note, Tania had mentioned kind of the perfect answers that are out there. One of the things that I use this book for when I'm talking to my students is I tell them that I couldn't write one of those perfect sample answers if I took the bar tomorrow. Stacy said that we have combined experience of about 47 years. I want to stress that that's combined. And that means we've all been doing this over 10 years. And I couldn't sit down tomorrow and write one of the perfect sample answers that's given. So I stress that to them, but I also stress, we're going to give you a play-by-play. We're going to give you a setup so you don't feel lost. So you kind of have the instruction on what you need to be doing. And we have things like keys to success to remind them of this so that they can kind of pull it out of the book and have it as a quick reminder. We talked to them about understanding the grading scale and really break it down for them, because I know a couple states like Massachusetts and New York, they veer off the 1 through 6 a little bit. And we do mention that. So if we have New Yorkers using this, they know that they kind of know how they compare. But we basically go through the 1 through 6. What do you need to get? What do these things mean? We talk about how 6 is a good answer, but it's not always perfect. We have 1 6 in the book that I think all 3 of us agreed was far from perfect, but it was one of the best answers the graders had seen in that particular section. And so I think that's important for students to see. And then most of the chapters have this at the end, but we kind of leave them with a quick guide, right? So you read the chapter, but we know students want some, here's the 3-minute version or here's the 2-minute version. So we do leave that in there and kind of sum up the chapter by saying, here's the steps you need to go through. Here's your quick guide, pull this out, use it as a reference, put it in with your notes, that kind of thing. And we kind of think of it as an attack chapter, or, attacking the MEE before we go into the sample questions and answers. The first thing we do in the MEE, we do this for the MPT as well, but I think it's important to kind of handhold a little bit, kind of show them and then have them do it and then have them be able to assess what they've done. So something we start them off with is we talk to them how to practice writing their essay. We give them an essay, but then we take them through the building blocks. So I know these slides are hard to read. We didn't know how big they'd be on the screen. So I do apologize for that, but this is a contracts essay from 2019. And it's in the book as it appears on the bar. And then we kind of tell them things like, first start with reading the call to question. Then you want to read the fact pattern maybe once or twice. Then you want to outline. Here we've each contributed an outline. I won't tell you whose is whose, it doesn't matter. But we each outlined in a very different way. And we want to show students that as well. We talk about how we know they're cramped for time, but it's important that they outline because that is ultimately going to help them organize later. And we do this, we each put in a different type of outline because we wanted to show them there's not one way to do it. You can each have your own outlining style. The whole idea is that you're planning what you're writing, you're thinking it through so you can manage your time. And then we kind of build up to the IRAC or the CRAC. We tell them that both are acceptable. This is because I think graders have different views, and ultimately either issue or conclusion will be accepted. So we tell them to kind of pick one and stick with that. And we build the essay with them. So we kind of say, okay, what are the issues present? Let's write those. Now let's add the applicable rules. Now let's add the analysis. So we're really showing them not only what an answer should look like, but how we got there. We're taking it through step by step, not just saying, here's a full essay, look at it and you figure it out. But when we take them through the steps of IRAC, we're like, first thing, we read the fact pattern, we read the calls of the question. Let's pull out our issue statements. What are they? Did you get the same ones we did? And we walk them through that. And then we walk them through that before they read a real bar exam answer. And I'm going to turn it over to Toni to talk about how she uses that in her classroom. So Toni, take it away.
So this next step is where our purpose for writing this book really kicks in, right? Because we've taken the students and we've walked them through how to write that perfect answer to this MEE. And now we're switching over to looking at some real, not perfect, right? But real bar exam answers for this MEE. And knowing what that perfect answer contains, both in terms of the law and the analysis, helps the students become active participants in the grading process. And so we take them, having built up that perfect answer, and we have them read through James's answer to the July 2019 Contracts MEE question, right? So they've read the Contracts MEE question, they've worked through building up the answer. Now we have them read through James's real answer that he completed in that 30-minute time block. And we give the student, first of all, just an opportunity to see what can truly be done in 30 minutes under real test conditions, right? This is, again, not that perfect answer that might be in one of their commercial bar reviews. This is a real answer that was completed on the bar exam. So we tell them in advance that James earned a 3 out of 6 for this answer. So the students know that this isn't going to be a perfect answer, right? But it's also not a failing answer. This is a true middle of the road answer. And we tell them that the exam answer has been copied exactly as it was written on the bar exam. So they see typos, they see spelling errors, they see all of it, right? But they see firsthand then when such mistakes impede the grader's ability to actually follow an answer and therefore affect the score, and when such mistakes are minor enough that they don't matter for grading purposes, right? Again, this is something we tell students all the time, but they can't trust you, right? Until they see for themselves that it didn't actually sink someone's score. And so once again, we're showing them instead of just telling them. And I'll come back to that later. But I think one of the really key points that I love so much about this book and all of these examples that we're able to provide the students is I am constantly giving the feedback to my students when they write essays, show me, don't tell me, right? Don't just jump to a conclusion, show me how you got there. Well, in teaching, I want to be doing the same thing, right? I want to be showing them, not just telling them what to write. And so this book gives you example after example of what works and what doesn't. And so this is their first foray into that with this answer. So we go from that, and then we had them read through James's answer. So now we walk through his answer alongside them, right? Just as we built the answer, that perfect real answer up together, we're now walking through, giving them feedback on this answer, together with them by providing our own feedback on his answer. And we chose to insert our feedback directly into his answer. You'll see here that we've got it in bold and shading is our feedback so that the students know exactly what is our feedback compared to what is James's answer. But we place it directly into the answer because we want students to pause and read our feedback immediately as each statement applies, right? We want them to immediately see how this could have been made better or what this answer did really well, right? Again, recognizing that there's good feedback and we need to improve feedback, right? And we want them to see both of those as they're walking through these answers. And so this begins our work on standardizing the students' grading and assessment of MEE answers because, again, we walk them through the grading process and allow them inside of our heads, right? Because we are showing them our feedback before we ever let them loose and make their own feedback opportunity. So after that, right, we stick with that same contracts MEE, so same question that they have gone through twice now, right? And this time we turn the grading of another real bar exam answer, this one's written by Peter, over to the student. And we let the student drive this time, right? But we admit to being backseat drivers because we guide them through their grading with a set of questions that are aimed at both the organization and the substance of the answer that they're grading. So we force the student to step beyond just yes, no answers. Like you'll see here on the right is an example of our kind of walking them through with those guided questions. It goes through, does Peter's answer mirror the numbering system used in the question, right? Such basic pieces as that. To how is Peter's answer organized? Is it IRAC or CRAC? Again, because it should be one of them. And so making sure that they're able to identify, is there a good organizational structure? Then we walk through each call of the question and we make sure begins with a clear issue statement or a conclusion, right? And then does it provide a clear and complete rule statement that's properly organized from a broad rule to the more narrow nuances as applicable, right? Because we're trying to reinforce that piece. And then do they provide a true analysis that applies specific facts from the fact pattern to that rule statement? So we're kind of repeating that definition of what analysis is over and over in their heads. And then do they finish with a conclusion, right? A clear and concise conclusion on each of those issues. And so we go through each call of the question with those prompts, but then we make them step aside from just that yes, no prompt to come up with at least one written comment regarding something that jumped out at them from Peter's answer. So we don't want them to just be able to sit there and go, yes, no, right? We want these students actively engaged. And so at the bottom, we say, what are your overall comments? And our goal is that they have more than one, right? But we want them to at least have one takeaway, like, wow, this had no analysis, right? Or gosh, like his rule statements were all over the place, right? Whatever it is, we just want at least one takeaway. We want them to actively critique these answers so that they can say to themselves, I don't want that to happen when I write it, right? And then we kind of play a little game where we have them guess what score Peter received out of 6, right? So they know what the last answer that we reviewed with them got, that 3 out of 6. Now they've read Peter's, where do they think Peter's lies, right? Because we want them to begin to create that grading scale continuum in their mind so that they're able to start filing those answers into that 1 to 6 scale and get a sense pretty quickly of the things that move you up and down on that scale. Alrighty. So again, we put them in the driver's seat, but we're still along for the ride, right? Like they're not doing it without us. And we also make sure that we don't just leave them wondering whether or not they spotted all the good, the bad, and the ugly in Peter's answer, right? We want to make sure that we, again, provide our own feedback on Peter's answer, and then we reveal his score at the very end of our feedback. So once again, they look to see, did I spot everything that is in their feedback, right? Our feedback. And we make a point of asking them after they've reviewed our feedback, whether they spotted all the problems that we'd identified. Because if not, we ask them to make a note regarding what part of IRAC or CRAC they need to focus on improving. Because generally, if they're not spotting the issue in this one, it's because they don't fully understand what a good rule statement looks like yet, right? Or what a thorough analysis should look like. And so that is something that we can pretty much assume they need to be improving in their own writing if they can't spot it in someone else's as needing help. So we have them identify that next step, right? That 1% level up for their next answer before we move forward. So keep in mind at this point, right, in just one chapter, in chapter 7, students have completed a deep dive walkthrough of how to build up a perfect contracts MEE answer, right? Then they've learned how to assess a real bar exam answer, and they've stepped into the grader's shoes by performing a guided assessment of yet another real bar exam answer. And that's just in the first chapter of our contracts walkthroughs, our MEE walkthroughs. So we don't stop there, right? We do all of this in the context of contracts, and we're not even done with chapter 7 at this point. That's like the first half of chapter 7. So from there, we keep going with contracts, right? Because they're getting kind of comfortable with the subject area. So we take the training wheels off and we jump into a completely new contracts MEE question. And we intentionally stay with contracts again, so students see the development of their writing and assessment within a subject area. So this time around, we have them read a contracts MEE and mark it up like they would if they were writing their own answer. Then we throw them back into the role of bar exam grader, and we have them grade 2 real bar exam answers, one of which earned a 3 out of a 6, and the other one which earned that coveted 6 out of a 6. And in doing so, we make them compare the two answers, right? We make them identify what exactly made that second answer worthy of the perfect 6 out of 6. So at each step, we follow their grading efforts with our own feedback. So their growing assessment skills can be positively reinforced when they see the overlap with what we identified, right? So these answers have strong organization, right? That 6 uses clear transitions. They use different paragraphs for the rules and analysis, making the answer easier to follow the grader. They had good time management, right, in determining which issues deserve more of their time. They have a great use of lots of specific facts in the analysis, which they clearly connect to the rules at issue using the word because, right? So the more they see their feedback matching up with ours, the more reinforcement they get for they're headed in the right direction on the assessment and grading piece, which means they also know they're building that checklist in their mind that they want to follow as well when they're writing their own answers completely. So our motto in general is practice makes prepared, not practice makes perfect. Because remember, we're throwing the perfect out the window. Perfect is not even, it's not that it's not attainable, it's not necessary, right, on the bar exam. What we're going for is a strong improvement with every practice that you are engaged in. And so just going back to what Tania was talking about at the beginning when she introduced our presentation and our concept behind this book, our goal with students is not what you've done up to now, it's what you're going to do next, right? And so we always want them to identify what that next step is for them. And so having focused our work in chapter 7 on the contracts MEEs, we shift to a new subject in chapter 8, which is civil procedure. Now, there may be some of you out there who are like, contracts, civil procedure, my favorite subjects from law school, but conferencing right now with a lot of 1Ls, they are typically not people's favorite subjects out of 1L year. And so we do that on purpose, right? Again, we start with the harder subjects and we build their basic skills using those to get them more comfortable, again, to build that confidence. And so just as in chapter 7, we begin by building the answer with them, then walking them through our grading of a real bar exam answer, then putting them in the driver's seat and grading another real bar exam answer. And then we switch it up and tackle a new civil procedure MEE. And why do we use the same process in both chapters? Because we want the students to see that the writing and assessment skills that they're learning are transferable between subjects, right? Most of their commercial bar review companies are going to give them lots of practice MEEs and sample answers, and some will even give them rubrics of a sort, right? But we want them to develop the skill of how to use those grading materials to not just improve their understanding of how the law applies to a specific set of facts, but also how to best present their knowledge in their answer to pick up the most points on the MEE. And so once we've built a foundation in their writing and assessment skills, we then move on to new MEE subjects in chapters 9 and 10. So in chapter 9, we have them grade and compare multiple answers to the same MEE question, moving between different MEEs as we progress through the chapter. And this helps them discover firsthand, again, what separates good, better, and best MEE answers on the same question. And that gives them a sense also of how graders see the spread show up in front of them when they're grading the bar exam, right? And how it helps them identify what the 6 looks like versus what the 3 looks like versus what the 1 looks like. And we also throw in a few crossover questions, right? Those ones that test on more than one subject at a time, so that they learn how to spot them, first of all, and also how to attack them if such a question shows up on their bar exam. And then we wrap up our MEE practice in chapter 10, where we present students with just solo essay answers. So one essay answer per question, and we allow them to really hone in on what makes or breaks the score for each MEE that they're reviewing. So by the time students have worked through the 5 chapters that make up the MEE section in our book, they'll have worked through 15 MEE questions covering all 12 of the testable subjects on the MEE, and they'll have reviewed 27 real bar exam answers, which received scores ranging from 1 to a 6. So just as we constantly tell our students to show us, don't tell us when they're doing their analysis, we too have shown them what makes a 1 and what makes a 6 and every score in between, rather than just telling them what to do, right? And we think that's really imperative because so many of our students, particularly those students who maybe find themselves in capture classes or needing some more support going into the exam, are often those students who need to hear the information more than one way. And so this gives you an actual kinesthetic opportunity for them to get their hands dirty on the grading and writing process and really improve it beyond just a lecture on how to write an essay. So that being said, we take the same approach to the MPT, right? To me, it's arguably even more important to perfect the MPT portion than the MEE, because each MPT is worth 10% of a student's overall bar exam score. So our MPT section of the book, we begin with the most tested of the MPTs, right? The Objective Mpt, first walking them through the writing process step by step, then walking them through the grading process, and then letting them take flight as they grade multiple MPT answers. Now, one of the things that I think is unique about our MPT section, and again, this goes along with our show us, don't tell us piece, right, is you saw how we built up the IRAC or CRAC with the MEE a few slides ago. We walk them through outlining the MPT. And it takes up a number of extra pages in this book because of it, but they see the outline get built as each case is read, as each statute is read, as each section of the file is read. They see us plugging things in as it's happening. And so it is copied and pasted over and over as it grows so that students can really see how this evolves in that first 45 minutes. And so by taking them through that step-by-step process, they learn how that process actually happens in real life and they see it happening. And then they also have a better grasp for that MPT when they walk through and do the grading. So they have a better understanding of what they're looking for. And then we repeat our study of the Objective Mpt, but this time we take the training wheels off a bit, right? Same as we did with the essays, and we jump straight to a review of the outline of the next MPT. So in chapter 12, we go step by step building it up, right? Chapter 11, or sorry, this slide is incorrectly numbered. I apologize. Chapter 12, we walk them through step by step. Chapter 13, we don't walk them through step by step. We jump to the end of 45 minutes and say, now here's our outline. How does yours compare, right? And then we go into the grading piece and get back to grading real bar exam MPT answers. And from then we move on to a chapter on the persuasive MPT using the same 2-chapter format, one with the training wheels and one without. And we close out our MPT section with a chapter on the wildcard MPT. which we teach students is really just a cute and fluffy little Objective Mpt dressed up in the clothes of some scary task that they may not have completed in law school, right? And we do that because every one of us tells our students, please make sure you practice just one of these during your bar prep, right? Because they're not as bad as they seem. You just need to get over the fear factor. And inevitably, our students don't actually do it because they're afraid of them. So by building it into the book, we force them to take one. We also then show them how it really was just an Objective Mpt dressed up with this little task off to the side, because we show them how it's so much more important to explain why you drafted this weird thing the way you did. And that why is an analysis, right? It's an objective analysis. And so our goal with our MPT section is to expose our students to each major MPT type so that they see it for themselves, right? That the process of working through an MPT packet and writing an MPT doesn't vary between MPT tasks. The only variability lies with the tone and the document structure. There's nothing to be afraid of, but it's also definitely worth practicing, because oftentimes it's those overconfident students who have done a ton of practical experience in law school that have to learn how to dial back and limit themselves to the 90 minutes, not get something done in 90 minutes. So by the end of the MPT section of our book, students will have written 5 full-length MPTs, 2 objective, 2 persuasive, and 1 wildcard. And even more importantly, they'll have reviewed 13 real bar exam MPT answers to get a real sense of what can be accomplished in 90 minutes under test conditions and what sets apart the low-scoring MPT from the high-scoring MPT answer. And I think that this is, again, one of the unique pieces of our book, because I know prior to this book, I would go on to various jurisdictions that provide sample student answers, right, or representative passing answers, but they were just that. They were all passing. And so this isn't just saying, oh, it's passing. It's telling me, was it passing at a 3, a 4, a 5, a 6, right? I mean, passing is a very broad phrase. And so it tells them what number this is so that the students can see what they want to strive for and what could be done even better on a 5 or even a 6, right? Melissa mentioned there's a 6 that we had to go around with each other and say, do you really think this would have been a 6? I mean, there were still things that could have been improved. And we remind our students that while we are not teaching them practice makes perfect, our goal while we're preparing them for the bar is to grade them against that 100% answer, because there's still time to get better between now and exam day, right? So we're going to grade them on that 100%. We're going to help them see what could still be done even better on that 6, because why not stretch a little bit more while we have time? And so that is the MPT portion of the book. But I do know that we've spent all of today's webinar discussing the MEE and MPT chapters of our book, because our focus has been on how to use real bar exam answers to show our students how to improve their MEE and MPT writing. But we do want to mention that the ultimate guide to the uniform bar exam would not earn its name if it didn't have a section on the MBE, right? The multiple choice portion of the UBE. You could not claim to be the ultimate guide of the UBE without some section on the MBE. And while I know I am a bit biased, I think our MBE section is pretty awesome, because again, it focuses on teaching students how to both take and assess their performance on MBE questions. But that's more for another day, another webinar. I also would be remiss if I didn't mention Professor Brittany Raposa's incredible mini sheets that are found in the appendices of our book. They are a fabulous quick review guide on each of the MBE and MEE subjects. And they even note the UBE exam where different subtopics were tested. So as your students are trying to get a sense of what do I definitely need to know, as opposed to what do I hope to get better at, if it has been tested, they're able to see that this is something that has been tested before or has been tested multiple times before. And so that's really useful to them. And I'm going to be honest, to us, right? I was just actually chatting with a colleague the other day, and one of the pieces in our teachers' materials is a index of all of the MEEs that have been given based on topic. And on our listserv, there was an email out about, does anyone have an MEE off the top of your head that tests this topic? And I just forwarded our teacher's manual piece and said, I'm not at a computer right now, but hopefully this helps. not only did it help them identify a question to use on that topic, but they had another topic they'd been wanting to find, but didn't have the time because a lot of us are rather stretched for resources right now. It helped them identify an MEE they could use quickly and effectively. And it has been probably the biggest gift to myself to have that particular item in our teachers' materials, let alone to my doctrinal faculty that I share it with as they're trying to figure out how to incorporate the bar stuff into their own teaching. So I have to give a huge shout out to Professor Brittany Raposa for her work on those mini sheets. And that definitely inspired a lot of our teachers' materials as well. So we wanted to make sure that we left time for questions. This is one of our most favorite times, right? Is when we get to interact with our colleagues, hear what questions folks have and what you all are doing. So on that note, I just want to thank everyone on behalf of us for joining us, but we are happy to take questions at this time.
Before we turn it over to questions, I just want to go off script really quickly. The MPT walkthrough that Tony was talking about is honestly one of my favorite things. And I can say that because Tony wrote the walkthrough. So I don't feel like I'm tooting my own horn when I say that it's one of my favorite things. But because I used to hate teaching the MPT, I will fully admit that. And her walkthrough really gives a structure. So when I teach it, not only does it give me a structure to kind of take them through step by step, but I've noticed my students have kind of this, it has a calming effect on them where they're like, oh, I have a plan, I can do this. And the way she does kind of fill in and add to the outline, they can really easily visually see how it's built. And so that is one of my favorite things that she wrote. But I think now, hopefully, you guys have questions.
Yes, thank you for your presentation today. We have moved into, of course, the Q&A portion, so please feel free to ask a question and type it into the chat, and I will read it out loud to our presenters. With that, we do have some questions to get us started. First question is, how do you use the feedback exercises from the MEE and MPT chapters in your own classrooms?
Thank you. We each use it a different way, so I think we'll just kind of, I'll turn it over to Tania and then to Tony because we each set up our classroom a little bit differently. So something that I've been doing lately, I found really works. I hope we'll see as I do it for a couple more years. Is Tony kind of mentioned, and I think Tania mentioned the students are often really nice to each other if you do partner grading. And I have found that as well, that if I put them with partners, when I first started doing this, I would remind them, be nice. These are your colleagues. Make sure the criticism is constructive. And I found that the problem is actually the opposite. I will get the rubrics that they gave to their partners that are their classmates and colleagues. And the rubric says things like, amazing, you're brilliant, everything's perfect. And I read the essay and I'm like, but it's not, you were really too kind there. So I found that the ability to go through essays of people that they don't know that are completely anonymous allows their feedback to be a little more honest and they're a little more comfortable to start with that. So what I do is I start them in groups. So with the first couple essays they do, I have them read the essay, like the essay prompt, I have them outline it, and then I have them read through the answers that we've given them. And, you know, the form that Tony showed you with like, we're kind of guiding them in the driver's seat through what questions to ask. I have them fill them out in small groups. And then I have them guess the grade. And I kind of turn it into a little bit of a Price is Right, where since I have like groups of 2 and 3, I kind of pit them against each other, how many people can guess, you know, closest to the answer, that kind of thing. And as Tony mentioned, we also have space in the questionnaires about, did you get everything that our comments listed? So we discuss it as a group and I kind of start putting things on the board. What did you guys find? What stood out to you? What made this a better score or a worse score? And then if we're doing 2 essays, how did it compare? And we kind of go through and try to get everything as a group. And I found that it makes class more interactive. It makes them more willing to give the criticism. And then, especially if they do have a partner, and then when they actually get to assess their own work or their partner's work, their assessment, I think, is a little bit more thoughtful and thorough. Tania?
Sure. So, I wanted to talk particularly about how we use the MPT. So I'm here in California, and actually the MPT portion of this book is extremely important here in California because California only recently adopted the 90-minute performance tests. And so there aren't enough sample sort of practice questions that are out there, out here in California to work from. And those that are there, believe it or not, California is known as one of the toughest bar exams in the country to pass. Believe it or not, the performance tests, at least those first several iterations of the 90-minute performance tests, were quite simple. They were very simple as compared to sort of the MPT. And so we have seen the past few iterations getting a little bit tougher. So it's really great. I get to use this book, and particularly the MPT portion, in my class. And my class, the way we do it, we have one section that is on the MBE. It's a 3-hour course. And then we have another 3-hour course on, per week on the writing section, which covers essay and MPT. And so we dedicate a number of classes to the MPT, where I take them first through what are the steps, generally in writing an MPT, which is laid out very well in the book. What are the steps in doing this? And then we actually do a few together with the class. And then we get to sort of assess, and they get to sort of talk about their comments and things like that. And then I can then reveal the actual comments that we had on particular MPT. So we'll do some of those together. And then we'll also do some for, of course, homework or in groups or in class exercise, where they get to sort of do their comments like, I don't know, this is what I thought, this is what I thought. And then they can then switch, either turn the page, or we can talk about it because I'm there live, about what we thought, what the three of us thought about that. So I really love that this is available and particularly useful. I know that California is not a UBE jurisdiction, but it's profoundly useful. And so we have this in our library, several copies of it in California, and students are constantly, checking it out for the MBE portion and the MPT portion. Tony?
Yeah, so what I love about this, I have used it in 2 different classes now. So I teach a 2L class that is a capture class for a segment of our population, and it is completely grounded in the MPT. So it's building on law school skills, but using the MPT as our foundation, and the cases that we read and the statutes that we learn how to break apart and analyze. And so I used this book in that class this year, and it was awesome because it gave me kind of a trial run to see how students would go through the feedback portion, right? And we used it in class more to guide our feedback. So we would go through and do more of the exercises in class, where they would review one of the essays, and then we would talk through their grading rubric, like Melissa was talking about, and kind of put things up on the board. I also teach a 3rd-year class, and that class is purely bar prep, right? So it covers the how to study for the bar, the ME, the MPT, and the MBE, with a much heavier focus on the written portion than the MBE, I'm going to be honest, because I want to give them that early feedback. And I've taught that class for like 10 years now, okay? This year I had our book to use, and it has been phenomenal in the difference it has created in the students' reflectiveness as they are doing their own self-evaluation. Because each of the MPTs, just as an example, each of the MPTs, they take either on their own or in class. But before I ever give them any feedback, they work through the rest of the chapter, right? So they have gone through, learned how to grade this MPT, graded a number of other real bar exam answers, and then I give them a self-reflection exercise on their own work to kind of go through and grade their own MPT before we meet to talk about it. And I have been astounded, because I used to have students come in and they'd be waiting to hear what my feedback was on their MPT, right? Because they had not thought about it or even known how to do it themselves yet. Now they come into conference and they're leading the conversation. I don't even have to raise my concerns. They're telling me, even before I talk about my feedback, they're telling me what they need to be improving on. And we're seeing if, again, it's aligning with what I thought they needed to be working on, or if they didn't spot something that I do want to highlight for them. But it is so much more empowering for them because they are seeing that they're able to do it without me, right? Which is great because I'm here during the summer. I run an essay workshop series during the summer and during the winter bar review. I give them weekly feedback, but the majority of their learning and improvement in the summer is going to come from their self-evaluation, right? And unless they feel like they know how to do that and know how to do it effectively, they are scared to truly jump into that step when they get to the summer. And so it's been so rewarding to have these one-on-one conferences with students where the students are already telling me what they want to improve on their own. It's not about what I'm telling them anymore. They're already seeing it before they even come in to meet with me, which I have to say, as a side note, is really lovely because it lets me also grow my class size, right? So it used to be that my feedback was kind of, all of their improvement was hinging on that feedback, which meant I had to meet with all those students and I had to go through and do really detailed feedback for all those students. And I still do that feedback, but they're getting way more out of the class than just that exercise. And because of that, I can take on more students because, again, there's more standardization now, and they're all getting to a place of being able to self-evaluate from the book in addition to my class sessions. That's just been really, really cool to see. And I do think there has been a slight difference between my 2Ls and 3Ls because my 3Ls are completely bar focused, right? By the time they get to me, they are just give me anything you can to help me pass this bar exam, right? As 2Ls, it's still kind of farther in the future and it's still this somewhat abstract idea, but the ones who had this class as a 2L and come into my third year class already have a sense of what's going on in the MPT. So watching what they've been able to come away with from these chapters has been really incredible as well, because they're taking it to a whole new level. The other way that I've used this is in workshops. So I have those capture classes, but for the rest of the student body, I have Saturday workshops and early bird bar prep workshop series. We used to pay sometimes commercial bar review companies to come in and put on some of those workshops because I didn't have time to build new workshops. I was just at capacity. These chapters basically gave me a workshop in a box. So my assistant director was able to take our MEE chapter with those contracts examples and create an essay workshop pretty readily, where we were able to, again, walk them through and create our own workshop and give them those sample answers and have them grade all within a 3.5 hour period without having to pay someone else. And that was really lovely because it gave us that capacity. And so we did the same with the MPT. And the nice thing too, that I do have to just throw out is, as we have taught with this book and created these PowerPoints, et cetera, there are things we just keep funneling into the teachers' materials that go with this book because we're constantly cooking with the book, basically, right? And so anything that we're creating, we're putting into those materials as well. And so as you all use this book, please reach out with feedback. We'd love to hear it because we're curious to see what experiences you all are having as well. It's been really remarkable for us this year.
So I know we're running short on time, but Elizabeth has a question in the chat about how do you take into account that essays are graded in comparison to each other? That one exam sitting could be a 2 and it could be a 3 in a different exam setting. And do you see that much variation in what constitutes passing? To answer the latter part first, when we put this together, we read a lot of graded essays that we collected. And there was some variation. There were some 6s and 1s that surprised us because that might not have been what we would have given a 6 or what we would have given a 1. So there was some variation there, but there was more often than not consistency in terms of, I think, what was good or bad about the essays that were receiving the same scores. And I'm honest with my students. So to kind of answer the first part of the question, I'm very honest with them. I tell them that it's subjective. I mean, grading, it's being done by humans. There is going to be subjectivity. I also tell them that the 1 through 6 scale, it's not scaled in a traditional law school sense, but given that a 3 is average, or I think a 4 is average and a 5 is above average, there needs to be an average, right? So the graders are looking at the other essays. So when I teach the essay that's a 6 in our book, one of them, that all 3 of us went, I don't think I would have given that a 6. I take that as an opportunity to talk to the class about how this might not have been a 6 in another bar administration or even on another topic. So I do address that with them so that they know that, it's not an objective grading and there's going to be variation there.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, this is a question that comes up all the time, regardless of the jurisdiction. And so I have seen that there are variations a lot of times between those lower scores, 1, 2, and 3. So I always tell my students, we don't want to just sort of roll the dice and hope that okay, maybe my 1 is really going to be a 3 this time, or, oh no, what if my 3 is a 1? We really want to aim them higher, because I've seen a little bit less variation in the high scores, in the sense that normally a high, what we would consider a high scoring essay, is not going to score lower. We have, of course, seen what we would think would be a low scoring essay score high, but I haven't seen too many situations where I'm like, wow, that really should have been a 6 and it's gotten a 2. Or it's gotten a 3, or it's gotten a 4, right? Well, maybe, but it's normally like, ooh, how did that get a 6? So we really have them sort of aim that higher to avoid some of that variation. Of course, it's going to be there because the graders are somewhat human, and, they are going to, have their own thoughts. But I always tell my students, let's not aim in that area, that sort of purgatory area. Let's try to get this situation where we know it's going to be a passing. It's just whether is it a 4, 5, or a 6.
Yeah, and that's what I would say too. We've tried to build in a lot of growth mindset into this book, particularly in part 1 of the book. But in all of these chapters, we really try and remind them, look, even that 6 could have been better, right? And it's not that we're trying to find bad, right? I do want to catch us on that, because I think that we were very intentional about the way that we phrased the feedback kind of guidance throughout the book, where it's not what did they do wrong, it's what could they have done better, right? How could they have moved themselves up that grading scale? And even with the 6, at first we were worried that the 6 wasn't as strong of a 6 as we would have liked. And in retrospect, I kind of love that it's not a strong 6, because again, it shows that someone got lucky based on the group, but it likely wouldn't have gotten a 6 every other time. And we're able to show that to students, and students are able to identify what that 6 could have done better, right? And how they could have improved themselves and gotten, again, more securely into the 6. And so I think that is how we kind of deal with the variation piece. But I also agree with Tania. I think you see much more variation in that lower portion than you do in the higher portion. And because of that, we just keep telling them, again, we're aiming over so that if you fall a little bit on game day, you fall down on the good score.
Absolutely. Wonderful, wonderful questions. And I don't see any more in the Q&A. I don't know if the author team wants to have any final remarks before we close our presentation today.
I would just say, if you haven't checked out the book, this is not a plug, but it's a plug. We love it. And, it's funny because I always think that it would have been nice to have something like this. And I think that's why we wrote it when we started teaching the UBE. I know Tony was sort of the first to start teaching UBE, but, I know when Massachusetts, when I was there, turned UBE, I was sort of like, what is this? And so, I enjoy it. And of course, sort of my whole thing, and I know Melissa and Tony are the same, is, not just what to write, but what to write, but also what not to write. And so, I love doing that stuff. So that's a little bit of a plug.
Tania and I actually wrote 3 now outdated books called What Not to Write. And they were for 3 states that are now UBE. But to echo what Tania said, I know I certainly sat down and went, I need to create class materials for myself. So we might as well put them in a book if I'm creating some of these materials from scratch. And to kind of build on what Tony said, that also means that as we create slides for the class, as we create teaching ideas, rubrics, things like that, they are included in the teacher's manual, because our idea was sort of to give anyone who wanted to use the book a class in a box, basically. And I thank you guys for joining us.
Well, and I will throw in our kind of closing comment then. So I joined the faculty at SLU Law the year that Missouri went UBE. And we were one of the first jurisdictions to do so. And I am still in a jurisdiction in Missouri where I can't get my students graded essays. Like, I can't see what a 6 looks like, or a 5 looks like, or a 4 looks like. And so one of the joys to me of working on this book with Tania and Melissa was they have students in jurisdictions where if you don't pass the bar, you can buy your answers and see what you did wrong. And those are the answers that we were able to include in this book. And so for me, I'm in the original UBE jurisdiction, and I couldn't use material like this to teach my students had it not been for this opportunity. And so I think that that's another great thing about the book, is that it takes some of the lack of uniformity amongst UBE jurisdictions out of the picture and allows you to really show your students just examples that you might not otherwise have access to. So we have really enjoyed this time, and our emails, as you can see, are on this slide. Please feel free to follow up with us if you have any questions as well. We're always happy to talk with anyone.
Wonderful. Well, today's webinar has concluded. I want to thank everyone for attending, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.